we see so much of her grief on full display, but also we see a little bit of her rage. Her rage in check as well, which I thought was interesting. Unlike Daemon Targaryen, an our immediate reintroduction to him, and he just wants vengeance. He just wants to put something in motion to cause as much damage to the Greens as possible, but he has a lack of authority, he has a lack of power. He is despite being married to a queen, he does not have nearly as much power as she does, and that frustrates him. And a lot of people throw that in his face. Now, he inevitably makes a decision in this episode that causes a lot of problems in the back third. Let's go ahead and move on to my review for House of the Dragon, Season 2, Episode 1. I've only seen one of these episodes. I'm not sure if these other critics got other episodes, Chad. Maybe they did, for all I know. I don't care. I'm just watching this series with the rest of you guys, all right? You know, and that's fine with me. So I'll just start off by saying, you know, like a lot of people, you know, a couple years ago, you know, I felt just very burned by the last episode and certainly the last season of Game of Thrones. It was the culmination of years of stories, great stories and subplots, interesting subplots, incredible acting, complex characters and with their respective arcs, and just amazing production design, you know, that was just all squandered. It was all squandered at the end because you had, David Benioff and then D.B. Weiss. They just want to rush the ending and end the series early because they want to make a Star Wars trilogy. That didn't even happen. That didn't even fucking end up happening. You know, and personally, I won't watch anything they make in the future unless it's finished and well-liked and well-reviewed. Now, when it was announced years later that HBO and Warner Brothers was moving forward with a spin-off prequel series, I and many others weren't interested, you know. But that series, House of the Dragon, did a miraculous thing, and that was get people interested in Game of Thrones. And you got to remember, too, chat, like, when that season was finished, that 8th and final season, I had never seen just a property just drop off the pop culture zeitgeist like that. Like, no one was talking about it other than to criticize the final season and certainly the finale, the final episode. It was crazy to see that in real time and how it just completely died off. And I'm sure HBO and Warner Brothers were probably panicking over that because they were worried, because they're like, this is still a huge property. It's still so many stories to tell. You know, it's a lot of potential, but, you know, the Benioff and Weiss, they ended up causing a lot of issues and spurning a lot of long-time fans, such as myself. And but in the case of House of the Dragon, you know, they did a miraculous thing, and that was get people interested in Game of Thrones and its world again. Thankfully, because, you know, the first season was written and directed incredibly well and featured fantastic production values. You know, reminded us how great Game of Thrones can be when it's in the hands of people that actually care and actually want to keep making a great story instead of just ending it quickly so they can move on to another project because they're bored or they want more money, you know. And, you know, with the way the last season ended with, you know, a major spoiler chat. So if you haven't seen the first season of House of the Dragon, I'm forewarning you, I won't get into too many spoilers of this particular episode. You know, I'll have to provide some context for the certain situations. But I will be spoiling parts of season 1. So if you've not watched it, maybe hold off on this review, come back in, you know, 30 or so minutes. But, you know, this particular... the last season ended with the death of Luke Valerian, at the hands of Aemon Targaryen, and the mouth of his dragon Vhagar. Luke got eaten. You know, I was so excited for the next season, and now here we go with the first episode. And listen, I have a lot to say about it. Both positive stuff and also some negative stuff, I have to admit. But again, you know, let me provide you with a brief synopsis before we jump into the nitty-gritty details. Immediately following the death of Luke Valerian, the Blacks and the Greens assess the dire situation at hand and make efforts to court as many of the great houses to their cause and the inevitable war that will engulf the seven kingdoms of Westeros. So I think the opening of the episode was great. Like, so much of it starts in the north, with the playing of the Stark theme, which is this very, sad, kind of mournful theme, with a narration from one of the ancestors of Ned Stark, Cregan Stark. And I just thought it was a great way to acclimate returning viewers just back to the show with one of the most familiar places, if not the most familiar place from the original series, and probably the most familiar family from the original show, that being the Starks. And the production values that were on full display were fantastic, just throughout, of course, the rest of the episode, but even here in the beginning, like from the sets, the location shooting, the wintry environment, the use of CGI and how that assisted the practical sets and sequences. It was great. I really, really liked that. And it was a quiet way to start this episode, but also to remind us of the great threat that lies beyond the wall. Right, act as a reminder, as exciting as this conflict is between these warring houses and family. There is like a greater threat, which the realm will come to know, 200 years later. But we quickly leave the realm of the Starks in the north and Winterfell and the Wall because Jacaerys Valerian learns of the death of his brother, as do many other characters, and pretty much this entire episode is about how they're all processing that death and what it means. It's also a recap of the previous episode's events and just how all these principal characters take this news and deal with it in their own way and the steps that they're taking in the inevitable preparation for war, the inevitable war that will engulf this entire family and probably lay waste to thousands, tens of thousands of people. A good portion of this episode does focus on Rhaenyra Targaryen. It's funny though, she barely says anything. I think she really only has one line in this entire episode. But when we first see her, she's a mother, fully wrapped in her own grief, not able to even find the body of her son or his dragon, at least initially, and trying to come to terms with that, not able to make any decisions because she is just so concerned and suffering. And I thought, what they ended up doing with her in this episode was quite powerful. Saying so little, but her emotions were on full display. I love the one line that she does have here, and I don't want to spoil what it is, but yes, we see so much of her grief on full display, but also we see a little bit of her rage in check as well. Which I thought was interesting. Unlike Daemon Targaryen, our immediate reintroduction to him, and he just wants vengeance. he just wants to put something in motion to cause as much damage to the Greens as possible. But he has a lack of authority, he has a lack of power. He is despite being married to a queen, he does not have nearly as much power as she does, and that frustrates him. And a lot of people throw that in his face. Now, he inevitably makes a decision in this episode that causes a lot of problems in the back third. And it's something I want to cover in more detail in just a bit. It's something that I was pretty excited about because I was aware of it. I actually have read, parts of Fire and Blood, which is a lot of this material is based off of, and that covers the Targaryen civil war. And it's an interesting aspect, and it's a sequence that I think paints a lot of different characters in a different light. But how the show chooses to handle it, I have to admit, bothered me a little bit. But I still want to kind of get into the positive of those episodes before I get into the negative. But it was great to see Daemon Targaryen being very much like Daemon Targaryen, just incredibly impulsive, hot-headed, calculating, no doubt about that, and very determined. I mean, Matt Smith, is typically, always very good in the things that he appears in, even if the project itself might not be great. But I think this is probably one of his best roles in years. It's such an exciting character to watch on screen, even if he has limited screen time in this particular episode. He just has so much charisma, coming off of him. Oh, other than Rhaenyra and Daemon, though, we spent actually a lot of time with the Greens, which have kind of been showcased as the villains for this, for this series, the usurpers, if you will, and we spent a lot of time focusing on Alicent and Otto Hightower, and their plans have kind of gone awry. They've wanted to put Aegon the second on the throne for quite some time, but it hasn't gone very smoothly, and they acknowledge that. They also acknowledge that Aegon the second is a bit of an idiot and is pretty ill-suited for the throne, and they're trying their best to wrangle him and control him and to educate him, but it's kind of impossible to put the demon back into the bottle at this point when he's already been unleashed upon the world and is, again, ill-suited. Aegon, I have to admit, we didn't get to know Aegon too much in the previous season. We obviously saw younger versions of him, younger versions of all the characters in the first scene, but he always came across as, being very petulant, very bratty, irresponsible, right? And just did not want anything to do with the throne at all. Matter of fact, he wanted to leave the Seven Kingdoms. He wanted to leave Westeros and not accept the responsibility. And this we kind of get to the parts of the episode that I personally found a little confusing. Because they try to establish Aegon as a more well-rounded character here, despite us seeing him be just kind of so awful in the previous season and never really experiencing that much depth with him. In this first episode, we come to learn that he's actually a really loving father, and he wants to constantly be involved, with his son, Jaehaerys, and he wants to actually be an earnest king. But then, a moment later, he'll be incredibly cruel and spiteful and belligerent. He just seems like a character that is, I don't know, is constantly in conflict with himself. And I'm not sure if that's intentional or if that's just the writers trying to make up for the fact, we really didn't do much of his character last season, so let's just kind of give him some depth or make him a little more well-rounded in the little screen time that he has in this first episode for the second season. I have to admit, I was getting a lot of whiplash with him in this episode. Some of it, it's not the actor either. It was just the writing for his character. I was like, okay, what are you trying to do with him? In one moment he'll be smiling and playing with his son, and the next moment he'll be teasing and acting incredibly cruel to one of his counselors. Less than a minute later, it was just, I don't know, it was just kind of confusing. And to be perfectly honest, it didn't work for me. I'm curious to see how they're going to handle him throughout the rest of the season, but he just seems like such an odd character, and one they don't really have an idea of what to do with at this point. Or they're almost trying to kind of retcon him. He's oh, well, yeah, he's all these things, but he's also this too. It's just well, if that was the case, then why in the previous season he's I'm just going to fucking leave. I'm just going to go. I want nothing to do with my life here, the family. Again, he was willing to leave the city and leave Westeros behind, but at the same time, you're telling me he's this loving father who loves his children? And his son is constantly wanting to play with his son, and he actually wants to interrupt his lessons just to be with him. It was just kind of well, wait a minute, a couple of days beforehand, he wanted to just leave everyone. So that was odd. And that didn't make a lot of sense to me, to be perfectly honest. Now, Aemon, on the other hand, I really like Aemon Targaryen. He's a son of a bitch, obviously, especially for what he did to Luke Valerion, in the previous season. But, unlike Aegon, who is an idiot and is completely unsuited for the throne or any type of leadership position. And again, it's not very intelligent at all. Like Aemon is just vastly superior to his brother. He is intelligent. He is knowledgeable both about history and philosophy, and he shows that in the matter he speaks. Like, his only problem is that he's impulsive, and that gets him into trouble. But for the most part, he is even keel. And I like in this episode that we see that side of him. We see the strategist in him, and his conversations with Kristen Cole, who I'll get to in just a bit. I think were very interesting. It also shows like a friendship that these two have. Like, I liked in the previous season 1, when they're looking for Aegon, they actually bond, and they are kind of fairly open and truthful to a degree with each other, and I like that. And so he seems very consistent, and he knows too that he fucked up by killing Luke Valerian. He knows that he made a mistake, and he is somewhat regretful over that, even though he said it's inevitable that this war was going to happen anyways, with usurping the throne. It's just now he's kind of being used as a pariah. He's being looked at as the reason why all this has happened, even though this was all going to happen to begin with. At the same time, I think he's a more consistent character than Aegon at this point, and I'm getting a better idea of who he is as a person. Kristen Cole is he's still a spiteful little bitch. That's exactly what he's been. If you need an image for spite, it's Kristen Cole. He still cannot get over being rejected by Rhaenyra all those years ago. Constantly brings her up, constantly talks negative about her. It's just like, dude, you gotta fucking get over it. Always shirking his duties, throughout the series and in this episode. I mean, Kristen Cole, he has always been consistently a spiteful little bitch, and he's very much that way here. And the actor's great. He gets himself caught with his pants down a couple of times in different ways in this episode. But I like what they're doing with his character and his relationship with the members of the Targaryen family. Are complicated to say the least, but I like seeing his relationship with Alicent Hightower. I like his friendship with Aemon Targaryen. I think that's really cool to see. And again, we get to the part of the episode that I was very excited for, because it's adapting this huge event that causes this spiraling effect and causes even more resentment between the Greens and the Blacks and the respective houses on both sides. And the last third, it focuses on these two assassins that are hired by Daemon Targaryen to kill a certain person within the Green household in King's Landing. Again, I don't want to get into too many spoilers. The thing is, though, they made some significant changes to this part of the story and from the books. And honestly, I think it felt off. And it was inconsistent. I mean, they ended up changing a lot of how that plays out. Like, it's completely different for the most part, except for the end result. But how it happens is very different from the original story and the assassination of a certain character. And it's framed in such a way where they want to make sure we don't make the Blacks, the Rhaenyra Targaryen and her contingent look too villainous. And I think that was a huge mistake. Because in the book, it's portrayed vastly differently, where you constantly, I think this is interesting, you go back and forth with each side, where each side has their villains and their heroes and their flaws and the things that make them good and bad. And I think this sequence here was undercut by the changes that they made. I think for a lot of people, it's listen, if you hadn't read the books, if you haven't read like Fire and Blood and the history of the Dance of Dragons, then this sequence to you probably was like, oh my God, like heartbreaking, heart-wrenching, incredibly sad, vicious. honestly, I thought I thought it had its teeth pulled out from it. I thought it didn't. It is not nearly as vicious and as cruel as it is in the books. And I honestly found that particular third of the episode to be disappointing, quite a bit. And even the reactions of like certain other characters was changed as well. And again, I'm bringing in like my knowledge of these stories, and for people that don't have that, it's like it probably won't affect them. They're probably thinking like, oh, I didn't have an issue with that third, but knowing like how just vastly different it is from the original source material, I was like expecting like, oh, they're gonna play this out, it's gonna be brutal, and yeah, it just wasn't nearly as brutal as it originally was, and just even like the origins of it was changed too. I think it was all done just so Rhaenyra's side and the blacks and their people would not be framed as villainous. It like the whole last third, it's like, it was an accident, it was a mistake, it was a misunderstanding. It just felt really weird, and I think they dropped the ball. I think they dropped the ball with that part of the episode, and it's frustrating because I like this story. I've loved the most part the first 2/3 of this episode. I feel like how they're handling Aegon is weird, and they don't really know what they're doing with this character yet. And again, it's not the actor's fault. I think it's the writing. But so much else it really worked for me, and of course I really loved the first season. But Hatchet, I gotta admit, I thought this first episode was disappointing. And certainly it ended disappointing. I'm not writing off the rest of the season, of course. I'm going to keep watching it, although I won't be doing like episode per episode, every week. I think I'll do like another impressions review probably when we get to episode 4 or 5 or something. But I feel like some of the changes that they've made, particularly when it comes to the last third, dealing with the assassins that Daemon hires for a certain mission in the Red Keep, it was not handled very well. And I think it undercuts the story that they're telling. And I think they purposely did it because, well, this story needs to have a good guy and this story needs to have a bad guy. And I don't think that's what the Targaryen Civil War is really about. Again, Game of Thrones, like, I think works so incredibly well when there's just, I mean, yes, we do have our heroic figures like the Starks, of course, but I think the series is at its best, or at least what I've been exposed to, what many of us has been exposed to of Game of Thrones or A Song of Ice and Fire or whatever you want to call it, is seeing these characters like make all these different types of decisions that leaves them kind of like morally gray. It makes them more interesting. It makes we don't know what to expect. And now I'm kind of getting a sense of like, all right, well, now I kind of know what you're doing just based on the framing of this particular episode. Certainly the ending of this episode. It takes away the morally gray mystique of this conflict, because you just want to make sure like, no. I mean, what happened was kind of an accident. It wasn't intended. This is like, well, in the books, it was very much intended. So yeah, I was frustrated by this episode, particularly the ending of it. And I know probably for a lot of people, you guys probably ended up really enjoying it, thought it was great, and I could totally understand that. Especially not having like read the material, be like just going in blind, be like, oh, this is fucking awesome. The scene was great. But yeah, for me, I have to admit, I was left wanting. Not writing it off again, like I said, but I'm hoping that it improves. And I'm hoping that this just doesn't become a story about good guys versus bad guys, because that's not what the Targaryen Civil War is about. And I hope they don't go in that direction, because they will undercut the story itself, which I will have a big issue with. But that's my thoughts so far on House of the Dragon. There's some good stuff in it, but there's also some stuff that I think is just not really working right now, and I'm hoping they improve on it. But what about you guys? Did you guys end up really liking the first episode of season 2 of House of the Dragon? Did you not like it? Were you more mixed like me? Maybe disappointed to a degree because you thought some of the decisions were poor. let me know.
5 minutes later.
No more jerking out the window, I know. He's a great character. He's an inconsistent character, I would say. That's the only part I got to in the book, that part of the assassins. Good to see a third. It was, yeah, it was a downgrade. I think it's a downgrade. I was just like, why did you do it this way? And there's even a scene, I forgot to bring this up. You guys mentioned, just to like hammer home that, okay, these guys are really bad, or just to, I don't know, the way in which they want to just emphasize how, these assassins are kind of going AWOL. It's as soon as the one just kicks the dog randomly, it's just like, well, okay, I get it. They're bad guys. And so bad guys, they don't like animals. They don't like dogs. So we're going to kick the dog. And I'm just like, okay. It just felt like really unnecessary to me. It kind of felt hokey. It felt campy. And I was like, why are you doing this? It didn't feel real. Let's see here. Yeah, it was downgrade. Shows in the Game of Thrones, that's for sure. That was great. Yeah, I didn't really like that ending portion. I liked the episode and welcome the episode. Welcome the turn of the show. And I think the changes to the ending were necessary because they depict what actually happens with blood and cheese. I would have stopped watching the show together. See, I wouldn't have. I think that would. Again, I don't want to say too much, but I feel like if they had done what they did in the book, it would have been. It makes it more morally complicated. It makes it more interesting, morally complicated, and I thought that was like, all right, and it's harder to, again, it's harder for us to, like, which side do we want to cheer for, I think I like that. Like, I always use this as like one movie that I'm not a big fan of, as you guys know, that I'm very divisive on, is Don't Breathe, right? And in that particular movie, they established, like, the two different sides, and you kind of don't know who you want to cheer for the first, like, half the film, where you have these kids breaking this person's house, and some of those characters are struggling, and they need this money, but they're robbing from this blind old man. The blind old man ends up killing one of the would-be burglars, and so at this point, it's like, well, they did break us into his house, but you care about these characters because of their circumstances, and you don't know who to cheer for, and it makes it very interesting, right? Until you find out he's created a weird sex dungeon where he has this girl down there and he's been breeding her with microwave cum for however long. It's like, what the fuck? And it's just like, wait, excuse me? But and so at that point, like, you can't cheer for that guy. You can't defend that guy because he's a monster. And in here, like, it's very obvious that what they end up doing with the assassins, with this blood and cheese, that they changed it in such a way that you don't hold the blacks, you don't hold Rhaenyra and her people fully responsible for what happened, because they went AWOL. The assassins went AWOL, and they ended up doing something completely different, what they were not told to do. Whereas in the book, they were told to do this thing, right? And it makes it more morally complicated and I think interesting. And I think the only reason why they changed it is because they want to frame Rhaenyra and her group as the heroes of the show, and they just want to keep the Greens as the villains. And personally, I think that's kind of lazy. I think that's not as interesting. Whereas, like, if they had actually done this horrible thing, it just frames them as this. It's just, again, morally corrupt, morally, gray sides that, you're like, there's some good about them and there's some bad about them. And, you have to make up your own decision who you would, support or who you feel invested in. Whereas now the show is making the choice for you. The show is telling you who the bad guys are and who the good guys are. And I'm just like, I felt like they were doing something more interesting than that. And again, they could be, but this was a mixed start, to say the least, for me. Yeah. Let's see what you guys are saying. The turkey baster. Oh, God. Damn plot twist. I'm sure not how depicting the blood and cheese scene book accurate reinforces the moral. I'm not sure how depicting the blood and cheese scene book I'm not sure how depicting the blood and cheese scene book accurate reinforces the moral. It does enforce the moral grain. It's 100%. And I don't want to. I can't say exactly what it is because it's a huge spoiler. But it shows that both these sides have a variety of issues. Like one is not better than the other, you know, and where the show is clearly telling you, oh, well, one side is clearly better than the other, you know. And I wish I could say more, but I don't want to do spoilers because that would be mean, and I don't want to ruin it for anyone. But I am curious to hear what people have to say about this. So here's why I disagree. I'm not sure what you're trying to say here, Ace Rock. Fanned Blood is a fictional history and is written by 4 different perspectives, none of which are fully reliable. It's Fire and Blood. It is written by 4 different people, none of which are fully reliable, and there's a debate as to whether or not the order was given in the way it was shown in the book. Yeah, well, they've made a choice now. The thing is, you're right. It's not reliable, and we don't know like how it went down. But now that the show has come out, they've clearly shown what the truth is now in the adaptation. And I think that's the issue that I have. Whereas in the book, it's written from different perspectives and things, and it's like, okay, it's up to you which one you want to think is true. And again, but it doesn't frame one side as always the heroes and one side as always the villain. That's what I'm saying. Because the show has made that choice. Now, if it was hearsay, if we didn't see the action and we were just told like this is how it went down, or we saw it from different perspective and people saw it in different ways, then like I think that would be different. I think if they had done it that way, that would have been much more interesting, more complicated, harder to probably pull off. But I think that would have been much better than here it is and this is how it happened. And I don't know, it didn't work for me. It really didn't work for me at all. And it has me a little concerned. I love the show shows the hypocrisy of some of the characters and their morals. Yeah, sometimes. But we'll see.